In the calm suburb of Elk Grove Village, Illinois, a young girl's plea to stay home from school on a brisk September morning in 1982 was the beginning of one of the most terrifying product tampering cases in American history. Mary Kellerman, just 12 years old, told her parents she had a sore throat and wasn't feeling well. As any parent would, they offered her something to ease the discomfort, a capsule of extra-strength Tylenol. Moments later, their morning spiraled into chaos. Mary collapsed on the bathroom floor, and despite desperate attempts to save her, she was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. On that very same day, September 29, 1982, less than 10 miles away in Arlington Heights, another tragic incident unfolded. Adam Janus, a 27-year-old postal worker, left work early due to chest pains. Seeking relief, he too reached for Tylenol. Within hours, Adam was dead. His devastated family gathered at his home to mourn, never imagining that the simple act of relieving a headache could lead to further catastrophe. Later that day, Adam's younger brother, Stanley Janus, and Stanley's wife, Teresa, took Tylenol from the same bottle. Both dropped to the floor almost instantly. Teresa died that evening. Stanley passed the following day. A pattern was forming, but no one yet knew they were facing a homicidal threat hiding in plain sight, inside a trusted medicine cabinet staple. By October 1, the death toll had reached 7. Mary McFarland, a 31-year-old single mother, Mary Lynn Rayner, a 27-year-old who had just given birth to her fourth child, and 35-year-old United Airlines flight attendant Paula Prince all died under eerily similar circumstances. The common thread? Each had ingested extra-strength Tylenol capsules shortly before collapsing. The death sent shockwaves throughout the greater Chicago area. Communities were in a state of panic. Emergency bulletins blared from police car loudspeakers urging citizens, do not take Tylenol until further notice. Drugstores began pulling products off their shelves. People dumped their medicine cabinets in fear. For the first time in history, the very notion that a widely used over-the-counter medication could be used as a weapon became a horrifying reality. Authorities wasted no time launching a full-scale investigation. Arlington Heights village nurse Helen Jensen visited the Janus home and noticed something crucial, a nearly full bottle of Tylenol missing only 6 capsules. Her observations prompted investigators to test the remaining pills. The results were as horrifying as they were conclusive. The capsules had been opened, emptied of their intended medicine, and filled with a deadly substance, potassium cyanide. Even trace amounts of this poison can kill within minutes by interrupting the body's ability to use oxygen, effectively suffocating victims at the cellular level. Once the cyanide connection was confirmed, a sweeping recall of Tylenol Extra Strength, 500 mg, was initiated. Over 31 million bottles were pulled from shelves nationwide in what became the largest product recall in U.S. history at the time. Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer, moved swiftly, though their public relations nightmare was just beginning. Despite no wrongdoing on the company's part, the tampering had occurred after manufacturing. Johnson & Johnson faced the monumental task of regaining the public's trust. They issued warnings, offered refunds, and dispatched representatives to media outlets in a historic display of corporate crisis management. Ultimately, their transparent handling of the situation would be praised by marketing experts and business leaders for decades. But while their brand survived, 7 families were left with unimaginable loss. As the FBI, FDA, and local law enforcement dug deeper, it became clear this was no random accident. Someone had intentionally laced capsules with lethal cyanide and placed the altered bottles back on store shelves. Investigators speculated that the poisonings took place in retail locations across several suburbs, making it impossible to trace which stores had been affected until it was too late. This wasn't sabotage at a factory level, it was a cold, calculated act carried out in plain view of unsuspecting shoppers. Tips flooded in. Panic-stricken residents phoned in every odd encounter or suspicious figure they remembered seeing at their local pharmacies. Theories abounded, but hard evidence remained frustratingly elusive. The killer had struck without leaving fingerprints, witnesses, or surveillance, and with the randomness of the victims, it was clear the motive wasn't personal. The randomness, in fact, was part of what made the case so chilling. There was no pattern to the victims, no connection in age, gender, occupation, or social circle. Anyone could be next. The Tylenol killer wasn't targeting individuals, he was poisoning the act of trust itself. It wasn't just the public who was rattled. Authorities were dealing with a new kind of crime, one without precedent. There had never been a documented case of lethal consumer product tampering on this scale. In response, the federal government began considering urgent legislative changes. This led to the birth of what would become modern tamper-evident packaging. Seals, shrink wraps, and breakaway caps, now standard on everything from over-the-counter meds to food containers, were born out of this nightmare. Still, while packaging could be fixed, the question remained, who had committed this atrocity? And why? In the months that followed, the investigation would veer down increasingly bizarre paths. A flood of leads poured in. Among them was a man who would soon become the focal point of the FBI's efforts, not because he had poisoned anyone, but because he tried to profit from the deaths. James William Lewis, a computer-savvy eccentric with a criminal past, sent a chilling letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the killings. His letter, postmarked from Chicago, laid out in exacting detail the company's steps to wire the ransom. He signed it with a cryptic warning and a show of control, as though he were orchestrating the deaths from a distance. But was he the mastermind, or simply a conman trying to exploit terror? As the Tylenol killing sent shockwaves through the suburbs of Chicago, the sense of normalcy was shattered almost overnight. Law enforcement agencies, local and federal, scrambled desperately to piece together a puzzle that appeared both random and meticulously orchestrated. The fear was palpable, anyone could be next, and the very medicine people relied on for relief had been turned into a vehicle for death. Amid this panic, a name emerged from the shadows, becoming inseparably linked with the poisonings: James William Lewis. Lewis was no stranger to trouble with the law. His record was marked by various minor offenses, nothing violent or extreme, but enough to make him familiar to police. Suddenly, he found himself at the epicenter of one of the most bizarre and chilling criminal investigations of the decade. What thrust Lewis into the national spotlight was a letter he sent directly to Johnson & Johnson, the pharmaceutical giant behind Tylenol. In this chilling correspondence, Lewis claimed responsibility for the poisonings, though never outright confessing to physically committing the murders, and demanded a ransom of $1 million. He threatened that the killings would continue unless his demands were met. This letter introduced an element of calculated extortion that added an entirely new dimension to an already terrifying situation. The letter was disturbingly detailed. It outlined payment instructions with cold precision, and despite the threats, it was ambiguous enough to keep investigators guessing. Was Lewis the man behind the poison capsules, or was he a manipulative opportunist exploiting public fear for personal gain? This question haunted the investigation. When authorities finally apprehended Lewis, their encounters with him were unpredictable. At times, he appeared defiant and uncooperative, brazen in his actions. At others, he volunteered information, offering theories and insights into how the murders could have been executed. Despite the intense scrutiny and interrogation, no direct physical evidence connected Lewis to the tampered Tylenol bottles. Without such evidence, murder charges could not stick. Instead, Lewis was charged and convicted for attempted extortion, a serious crime, but one that left many wondering if justice had been fully served. Throughout his prison term, Lewis maintained a peculiar stance. He chose to assist investigators voluntarily, sharing ideas and possible explanations for the poisonings. In a 1992 interview with CNN, he defended this cooperation by likening it to a passerby who stops at a burning house, not because it's their problem, but simply because it's the right thing to do. This unusual attitude further complicated the narrative surrounding his involvement, blurring the lines between suspect and informant. Upon completing his sentence, Lewis was released, but the cloud of suspicion never fully lifted. The question remained, was he the puppeteer orchestrating a deadly campaign, or was he merely a man who seized the moment to exploit a national crisis? His story underscored the difficulty investigators faced in distinguishing fact from manipulation in a case that was already mired in uncertainty. While Lewis remained the most prominent suspect, the investigation broadened, exploring other leads and persons of interest. One such individual was Roger Arnold, a dock worker known for a volatile temperament and history of violent behavior. His proximity to the stores where cyanide-laced Tylenol bottles were discovered made him a compelling suspect. Law enforcement sought to gather DNA samples from Arnold, hoping advances in forensic science might provide answers that had eluded them for years. In a surprising twist, investigators also looked at one of the nation's most infamous criminals, Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber. Kaczynski's expertise in explosives and chemicals, combined with his campaign of terror through mailed bombs, made him a logical figure to consider. Authorities requested his DNA to compare with evidence from the Tylenol case. Yet, no connections emerged, and the theory was eventually dismissed. Despite these numerous leads, the true killer remained elusive. This was not a crime driven by personal vendetta or visible motive. Instead, it was an attack on public trust, a crime that weaponized a product used daily by millions. The anonymous perpetrator left no fingerprints, no eyewitness accounts, no clear trail. It was as though the killer was a ghost, slipping silently into the aisles of drugstores to sow chaos and death. The repercussions of the Tylenol murders extended far beyond the immediate tragedy. The incident became a defining moment in consumer safety history, exposing vulnerabilities in the way over-the-counter medicines were packaged and sold. It spurred sweeping reforms. The introduction of tamper-evident packaging, seals, foil wraps, and breakable caps became the new norm, protecting consumers from similar acts of sabotage. Today, those protective measures are so ingrained in our daily lives that it's easy to forget they exist because of such a horrific crime. Decades have passed, but the Tylenol murders linger as a haunting reminder of the fragility of safety in everyday life. Unlike many notorious cases where justice eventually prevails, the identity of the person who laced those capsules with cyanide remains unknown. Even with the tremendous strides made in forensic science, the case stands unresolved. Yet, recent developments have injected fresh hope. Law enforcement agencies are collaborating with cutting-edge biotechnology firms, employing new DNA analysis techniques that were unimaginable in 1982. These advances have the potential to unlock secrets from decades-old evidence, offering a chance, perhaps the last, to bring closure to this chilling mystery. For the families of the victims, the passage of time has not diminished their search for answers or their desire for justice. Each life lost in this tragedy was a unique story, abruptly ended by an act of senseless violence. 12-year-old Mary Kellerman, whose illness was thought to be minor until she collapsed, Mary Lynn Rayner, a devoted mother who had just given birth to her fourth child, Adam Yanus, a postal worker with a family who loved him deeply. These were not just names in a file but cherished individuals ripped away far too soon. Their deaths serve as a stark and somber reminder: the very objects meant to heal and comfort, medicine and the trust we place in it, can be turned into instruments of terror. This case forces society to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability and the invisible threats that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary life. It challenges us to remain vigilant and to honor those lost by never forgetting the lessons forged in the wake of tragedy. The Tylenol murders did more than just terrorize a region, they shook the very foundation of consumer trust in America. When 7 innocent lives were stolen by a cruel and anonymous killer who weaponized one of the most common household medicines, the nation was forced to confront a terrifying reality: that safety could no longer be taken for granted. In the immediate aftermath, Johnson & Johnson's response was unprecedented in its scale and speed. Facing an overwhelming public health crisis, the company issued a nationwide recall of 31 million bottles of Tylenol. This action was historic, the largest consumer product recall in U.S. history at the time. The company's transparent communication, including public apologies and cooperation with health officials, helped to eventually restore some confidence in their brand. But the damage was deep, and the fear was far from gone. Stores across the country removed Tylenol from their shelves, and consumers were left terrified of taking any over-the-counter medication. The deaths were not only a tragedy in human terms but a nightmare for the pharmaceutical industry and regulatory agencies. People's fear extended beyond Tylenol. It cast doubt on the safety of everyday products that until then were considered benign. In response, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, took immediate steps to ensure that such a crisis could never recur. New regulations mandated tamper-evident packaging on all over-the-counter medications. This included multiple layers of protection, foil seals beneath caps, plastic wrappers around bottles, and visibly broken seals alerting consumers to any interference. These precautions, which have since become standard worldwide, owe their origin to this dark chapter. But the Tylenol murders left another legacy, one that continues to shape criminal investigations involving product tampering. The case pushed forensic science to innovate and evolve. At the time, the lack of surveillance footage, eyewitnesses, or physical evidence made solving the murders nearly impossible. Cyanide poisoning leaves few forensic traces beyond toxicology reports, and the poisoned capsules themselves were largely consumed or disposed of before investigation. Today, forensic experts are revisiting old evidence with new technologies. Advanced DNA sequencing, including methods capable of extracting genetic material from degraded samples, has opened a path to potentially identify suspects previously beyond reach. Law enforcement agencies are collaborating with biotechnology firms, combining decades-old evidence with cutting-edge science in hopes of finally cracking the case. Despite these advances, the Tylenol murderer remains at large, a haunting reminder that some crimes resist closure. The chilling reality is that the killer exploited an everyday item meant for healing, turning it into an instrument of death with devastating effectiveness. The families of the victims have become advocates for product safety, education, and awareness. They have tirelessly urged authorities not to let the case grow cold, keeping the memory of their loved ones alive and pressing for justice. For them, the tragedy is a daily reality, a wound that time has yet to heal. Beyond individual grief, the Tylenol murders transformed the American psyche. The incident highlighted the fragility of the systems we rely on, and the lengths to which some will go to sow chaos. It underscored the importance of vigilance and regulation, not just in medicine, but in all consumer goods. The fear it instilled fostered a more cautious, skeptical public, forever changed by the knowledge that danger can lurk in the most ordinary places. For Johnson & Johnson, the crisis was a defining moment. Their handling of the tragedy is often cited as a model for corporate responsibility and crisis management. By prioritizing public safety over profit and demonstrating transparency, they managed to survive one of the greatest corporate crises of the 20th century. Yet, the memory of the victims and the scandal lingered, a permanent scar on the company's legacy. Law enforcement agencies continue to review the case periodically, prompted by new leads or scientific breakthroughs. It remains one of America's most infamous unsolved crimes, a case study in both criminal ingenuity and investigative persistence. Every so often, renewed hope surfaces, whether through anonymous tips, re-examination of evidence, or technological innovation, reminding the public that the search for truth endures. As you hold a bottle of medicine today, with its tamper-proof seals and layers of packaging, consider the dark history that made those protections necessary. The Tylenol murders were a wake-up call, a horrifying demonstration of human malice that triggered reforms saving countless lives since. This case stands as a testament to the need for constant vigilance, innovation in forensic science, and relentless pursuit of justice. Although the perpetrator remains unknown, the lessons learned have shaped safer products, smarter regulations, and a more aware public. The Tylenol murders may have occurred over 40 years ago, but their impact echoes loudly today. The mystery endures, but so does the hope that one day, science and perseverance will bring closure to one of America's most chilling and enigmatic crimes. Thank you for listening to Crime Echoes with Lewis. For more content like this, please like this video and subscribe to my channel.